all accounts, Dr. James Cedar was a highly respected man in Huntington, West Virginia, a bustling town on the banks of the Ohio River. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single soul that had one cross word to say about him. After all, he had lived an amazing life. He was just a boy when the war between the states broke out, where he lost his father and his home to war. So, at a young age, he was forced to work to help his mother survive. But she loved young James. He was her only child, and she devoted her life to teaching him about the Lord. And despite the heartache that they had experienced, she always told him to look for the good in any situation and to be a light in the world that was full of darkness. She equipped him with a spiritual view of life and raised him on a strong biblical foundation. Indeed, she was quite the role model for James, and her words and actions shaped his life. So it was, James grew up a kind-hearted man and dedicated his life to helping others. By the time he was 20, he had become a minister and traveled all across America, helping communities rebuild after floods and natural disasters. James never forgot how the Civil War had tore apart his family, and when he thought of all the children across the world in war-torn countries, he felt a calling to help them rebuild their lives. By 1896, James was 38 years old, and he had earned a doctorate degree in theology when he boarded a ship in San Francisco and sailed across the ocean, traveling to Japan, who had just ended the Sino-Japanese War of 1895, and the country was undergoing tremendous revolution and change. James spent 6 months helping to rebuild schools and to provide clean drinking water for the rural areas that had been devastated by Japan's war with China. After Dr. Cedar returned to America, he became a national leader in the temperance movement that was sweeping across the nation in the build-up to Prohibition. The good doctor traveled all across the U.S., preaching about the poison and dangers of alcohol and how it tore families apart. And after Prohibition became the law of the land in 1920, Dr. Cedar moved to the mountains of West Virginia. Indeed, the good doctor had made quite a name for himself throughout his career, and even though he was now retired and living out the golden years of his life, he was still fulfilling his life's calling of helping others. You see, Dr. Cedar owned several rental properties, and he had made it a habit of renting them out to folks who were down on their luck or needed help rebuilding their lives. It was common for widows to live in these houses, rent-free until they were able to provide for themselves. Likewise, for single mothers or families that had lost it all due to fire, they all lived here for free. And Dr. Cedar never asked for a penny in return. In fact, he would frequently stop by with bags of groceries as a gesture of kindness. He also believed in giving others a second chance, and he provided halfway houses for men who had recently been paroled from prison. No matter what their crime was, he never turned them away. And he helped countless men restart their lives in this way. So you see, Dr. Cedar was an outstanding citizen and a kind soul, and everyone in Huntington, West Virginia loved him. By the summer of 1937, James Cedar was now 79 years old and in fragile health and nearly blind. His wife had recently fell and had been hospitalized for the last 3 months. Yet, despite this, he had a heart towards charity, and he had recently taken in a new boarder named Arnett Booth, who had been paroled from prison to allow him to receive medical treatment at the Veterans Hospital. Booth was a clean-shaven, bald-headed man, and the hard times of his 46 years here on Earth were etched in the lines on his face. He was a World War I veteran who had worked on the ammunition trains in France and had been exposed to mustard gas 6 times during the war, which had resulted in lifelong health issues. So when he returned from the war, he came home to America and couldn't find a job due to his health issues. Thus, he resorted to the life of a criminal and was in and out of jail for stealing cars. Yet, despite his past, Dr. Cedar took him in like everyone else, no questions asked. And that summer, Booth made great strides at turning his life around. He worked every day down on the river as a deckhand, and in the evenings he would do all sorts of handiwork for Dr. Cedar, fixing leaking faucets, painting fences, and anything else he could do to show his gratitude. The two men would spend many evenings just sitting on the front porch, talking about life, and over that summer, heck, they had even become friends. However, for some reason, Dr. Cedar's oldest son didn't trust this new boarder, Arnett Booth, and he told his father several times, "Don't get too close to him. Dad, I'm telling you, there's something in his eyes, a darkness that I've never seen in a man before." His son said, "I'm telling you, the sooner you can get that fella to move on, the better, because there's something evil lurking behind those eyes. I can feel it." But despite his son's warnings, Dr. Cedar continued to allow Arnett Booth to live in his rental house next door for free. But the questions remained. Who was this stranger who was suddenly full of good deeds? And more importantly, who knew what his true motives were? After all, a man who spent his entire life in World War I and in prison was surely capable of anything. And what happens next would rock the entire state of West Virginia and send shockwaves across America. Hey guys, JD here. Click the link below to check out my new book. It's full of stories just like the one you're listening to right now. Now, back to the story. So it was. Dr. Cedar spent the entire summer and fall getting closer and closer to Arnett Booth, a Roman boarder who was fresh out of prison. Dr. Cedar had vouched for Booth on a few occasions at local stores and businesses to allow the parolee to begin building his credit. By all accounts, it looked like Booth was genuine in turning his life around, like so many men the elderly man had helped before. On Friday, October 29th, 1937, Dr. Cedar got a phone call from Frank Lester, the owner of the local hardware store, who had opened an account for Booth because of Cedar's recommendation. It seemed that Booth had written a hot check for $30 to the store owner, and well, the check bounced like it was made out of rubber. And when Cedar confronted Booth about the check, he claimed it was an honest mistake, and that he would go to the bank first thing Monday morning and cash his paycheck for $60 and head straight over to the hardware store right away to reimburse the store owner. In fact, Dr. Cedar, I'm terribly embarrassed of this. After all you've done for me, I'd like you to go with me so I can apologize to both of you fine men, face to face. Last thing I'd ever want to do is to stain your reputation. I insist. Please go with me. And with that, James Cedar agreed to set out with Arnett Booth. Monday, November 1st came, and like promised, Booth appeared bright and early to Mr. Cedar's house. "Well, I'll go get my car ready," the old man said. "Oh, there's no need for that. I got my own car, Doc." "You do? Well, where'd you get a car?" "I got it from my dad. I spent the weekend down in Paintsville, visiting family, and he let me borrow it until I can get one of my own." "Is that right? Well, how about that? Look at you, young man, working hard, making good on promises, and mending fences with your family. I'm right proud of you." And within a few minutes, the two set out for a trip to the bank to cash that $60 check. Yet, when Dr. Cedar got in the car, there were two young men in their 20s in the back seat. "Oh, don't worry about them, Doc. I got me a job up on Old Man Watkins' farm today. The cows tore his fence up and got out. These fellas are going to help me fix everything up after we pay Mr. Lester down at the hardware store." Satisfied with Booth's explanation, the four men set out for the short drive to the bank. Yet Booth drove right past the bank, explaining that he'd like to go ahead and drop the other two men off at the Watkins farm and let them get an early start while he settled up at the bank. Now, Mr. Watkins' farm was about 7 miles out of the city limits, and it didn't make much sense to Dr. Cedar to drive that far out. And even more concerning, as soon as Booth passed the Watkins farm and turned off onto a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, the car ride suddenly took a drastic change for the worse. Before the doctor could even speak, one of the men in the back seat put the cold barrel of a .357 Magnum against the back of the old man's head. By nightfall, the quartet had arrived at an old abandoned cabin in the rugged mountains just south of Wayne, West Virginia. There, the three men tied the old man up to a chair and gagged him before taking the butt of the pistol and hitting him in the head, knocking him unconscious. As the night went on, the doctor was completely out, and the three men casually spent the night drinking whiskey until the sun finally rose. Dr. Cedar finally came to, confused and scared. What was this all about, and where was he? And once Booth saw that he was awake, he revealed his plan and demanded that Dr. Cedar walk into the Huntington Bank and cash out his entire savings. But when the doctor refused, a savage beating with an empty whiskey bottle ensued, breaking the doctor's nose and several fingers before once again knocking the old man out. Realizing that their plan to rob the old man had fell through, the three men emptied Cedar's pockets and began dragging his limp body through the rainy woods. Soon, they came to a deep ravine where they tossed the old man's body down as it crashed into dozens of boulders and trees before his broken body came to rest at the bottom. Yet they weren't done. The three men carefully made their way to the bottom where they continued dragging Dr. Cedar, who was completely tied up and gagged for nearly a half mile until they came to the mouth of an old abandoned coal mine. And there, the three men tossed him down nearly 50 feet to the bottom of the dark, wet dungeon where they left him to die. And I tell you right now, if you think things were bad for Dr. Cedar, this was only the beginning, and what happens next would be pure hell on earth. On November 1st, 1937, Dr. James Cedar was left for dead in an abandoned coal mine deep in the remote mountains of Wayne, West Virginia. It rained nonstop for the next 4 days when the 79-year-old man finally regained consciousness. He was still tied with rope like a mummy from head to toe, and he hadn't eaten days. His nose was broken, and his eyes were nearly swollen shut from the savage beating that he had took from the butt of a .357 Magnum in a whiskey bottle. The left side of his body was partially paralyzed from the vicious blows he'd received to the head. The cold rain had poured in on him non-stop, and he was suffering from hypothermia. Yet, somehow, he was still alive. By November 6th, the entire community was searching for Dr. James Cedar. No one had any clue what had happened to him, and that's when his son received a letter in the mail that demanded $50,000 cash for the release of his father. And this ransom note suddenly thrust the case into the national spotlight. And more importantly, it was now a federal offense, as the FBI swarmed the mountains of West Virginia looking for the elderly man. Suspicion was immediately centered on Arnett Booth. Twice, the FBI brought him in for questioning, yet twice he was released. And on November 8th, Booth secretly made his way back to the abandoned mine to get rid of the doctor's body. Yet, to his surprise, the elderly man had somehow survived a week without food or water. And that's when the convict reached down and grabbed a large stone, nearly 5 pounds in weight, as the old man cried and begged for mercy. But he showed none and began bashing Dr. Cedar over and over until he was absolutely sure that he was dead. As cruel as it was, the nightmare was finally over as the criminal covered his tracks and left the mine for the last time. By November 10th, folks began to think that the elderly man must have wandered off into the woods with his poor eyesight and gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. Authorities slowly began to call off the search. It seemed his body would never be found, and the killers would get away with murder. Yet, back in that cave, somehow, Dr. Cedar was still alive, albeit barely. He had managed to pick up a sharp-edged rock, and over the past 2 days, he managed to saw the rope that was keeping him hostage. He was finally able to sit up after 11 days, but he was hardly out of trouble. He had no use of his left arm and had several fractures to his face, and his right ankle was broken. Yet somehow over the next few hours, he managed to climb out of the 50-foot deep hole. Next, he had to climb out of the steep 30-foot deep gully with only one arm and one good leg. He got nearly to the top, but it was pure mud due to the nonstop rain, when he slipped and flipped end over end, crashing all the way back to the bottom. He broke 3 ribs in the fall, but he still had his will to live, and he kept fighting all the way up the gully. He began to climb again, when finally at nightfall, he drug his body out of the would-be grave and collapsed. Within an hour, a farmer was driving his tractor when he saw something laying on the side of the road, so he stopped to investigate. There on the ground, covered in blood and mud, so weak that he could barely even moan, was Dr. Cedar. Somehow, he had survived complete hell on earth and was finally rescued and taken to the hospital. By the time he arrived, the FBI was already waiting for him. He was so weak that he could barely talk, and the doctors quickly determined that his brain was bleeding, and he had double pneumonia from exposure to the elements. "Dr. Cedar, can you tell us who did this to you?" They asked him over and over. He tried to speak, but he was so weak he couldn't form a complete sentence. Finally, an agent put his ear near Dr. Cedar's mouth and asked again, "Dr. Cedar, just tell me the name of the person who did this to you. Just 2 words. That's all we need." And with the faintest voice imaginable, he replied, "Arnett Booth." And with that, he fell into a coma, and he would never again wake up, and died 10 days later. However, now was the time for justice to be served. The FBI quickly arrested 46-year-old Arnett Booth and his 2 accomplices, Arvil Atkins and John Travis, both of whom were 26 years old, and all 3 men had extensive criminal records and had been in and out of prison. But this time was different. They were faced with first-degree murder, and they folded like a house of cards and agreed to confess to the murder if they were promised that they would be spared the death penalty. However, due to the national attention, Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, promised America that they would seek the death penalty and would show no mercy to the trio. Now back then, justice was swift. Dr. James Cedar had died on November 21st, 1937, and by mid-December, the trial was underway. The FBI found Booth's fingerprints all over the ransom note, and they even found the pack of envelopes that the ransom letter was mailed from in his apartment. His fingerprints were literally all over the crime. And on December 17th, before a packed courtroom, all 3 men were convicted of first-degree murder within 50 minutes of jury deliberation and were sentenced to death by hanging. During the announcement, the younger killers, Travis and Atkins, cried openly, yet Booth never even blinked. All 3 killers were sent to West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville while they exhausted all their appeals. And by March 21st, 1939, their day of reckoning had finally come. The day began with the 2 younger men being baptized in the prison fountain, while all the other prisoners watched. They spent the entire day with preachers reading the Bible before they ordered their last meals. Booth and Travis ordered fried chicken, while Atkins ordered fried oysters. Finally, at 9 p.m., it was time. But there was a problem. You see, the the gallows could only accommodate 2 hangings at a time. So the warden decided to flip a coin to see who would get to live just a few precious minutes longer. And wouldn't you know it, Booth won the coin toss. That meant that Atkins and Travis were up first. The prison was overwhelmed with requests for passes to witness the execution from all over the world. So a lucky 150 people were selected by a lottery system, and they were in a festive mood, with lots of talking and joking as the 2 killers were marched up the 13 steps to the top of the gallows. Travis was on the left and Atkins was on the right, both of them with their hands tied behind their back. As the guards were adjusting the noose around Atkins' neck, suddenly, without warning, the spring in the trapdoor broke, causing him to go through it, and after stretching his neck out real good, his body crashed down to the concrete floor, busting his head open. Feeling disappointed, shouts came from the onlookers, "Hang him again," echoed through the crowd. The guards simply put him on a stretcher and passed his body back through the trap door and retied the noose around his neck again. A few moments later, a buzzer went off and the trap doors both swung open. 15 minutes later, both men were pronounced dead. As soon as their bodies were removed, Booth took his place atop the gallows, and when asked if he had any last words, ironically, he told the men in the room to avoid alcohol and live for Jesus. And because he had murdered a man that had devoted his life for that very same cause, that trap door was swung open, and a moment later, Arnett Booth met his maker on the other side of eternity. Thus concluded the first triple hanging for kidnapping and murder in the history of West Virginia.